Disclaimer: this content is intended for a mature audience only. Viewer discretion is advised. It was past midnight, and the silence in our bedroom had weight to it, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that pressed on your chest like a secret no one dared to name. The air was still. I could hear the slow ticking of the clock above the dresser, his shallow breathing on the other side of the bed, and the soft hum of something unspoken between us. I had asked him once, gently, half laughing, if he enjoyed keeping me awake like this. He didn't answer. He just looked at me with those unreadable eyes, and then turned away like that silence was his answer. Tonight, it wasn't about words. It was about what he didn't say, the way he barely brushed my shoulder as he walked past, the way his voice dipped when he whispered, "Not yet." There was nothing cruel in it. Nothing loud. Just a quiet kind of control that made me feel seen and challenged at the same time. And somehow, that made it harder to resist. I wasn't angry. I wasn't confused. I was caught. This man, my husband, the one who'd kissed my forehead after long days, who knew how I liked my tea and where I hid my worries, he was different lately. Not cold. Just deeper. Still waters that weren't so still anymore. He made me wait. For sleep. For comfort. For the softness I used to take for granted. And maybe I should have demanded more. Maybe I should have rolled away, closed my eyes, ignored the gravity of his presence beside me. But instead, I sat there, holding my breath, wondering how far he'd let me fall before he caught me again. Maybe this wasn't about punishment. Maybe it was about trust. Maybe it was about knowing I'd come back, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. And just when I thought I couldn't take the tension anymore, when my voice finally cracked in a whisper and I said, "Please," he turned. Slowly. And smiled. He smiled, not the playful, teasing smile he wore at dinner parties, or the tired grin after a long workday. This was slower. Quieter. Like he knew something I didn't. I waited for him to say something, anything. But the silence between us stretched like fabric being pulled too tight. His gaze lingered, and I felt it, like a thread tugging gently at the base of my spine. It wasn't about dominance or games. It was something deeper. Something older. Like he needed to hear me reach for him, not out of habit, but out of choice. We'd been married 3 years. And before that? We were best friends who pretended we weren't falling in love, until we finally did. We danced barefoot in our first apartment, shared ramen when the money ran out, whispered dreams into pillows as if the world would break if we spoke them too loud. But lately, something had shifted. He'd become more still. More deliberate. And I'd become afraid of stillness. Afraid of what might come up in the quiet. "Why are you looking at me like that?" I finally asked, barely above a breath. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer, not rushed, not aggressive, just certain. "You used to look at me like you needed me," he said. "Now you just look tired." The words landed soft but heavy. Not an accusation, just an observation that knew exactly where to hit. I blinked, but my eyes stayed dry. Maybe I'd already cried all the tears that mattered. "I am tired," I said. "But not of you." He nodded, eyes never leaving mine. "I know," he said quietly. "That's why I'm not letting you sleep yet." And just like that, the air shifted again. Not cold. Not warm. Just thick with everything we hadn't said in weeks. He sat down beside me, close but not touching. Waiting. Not for my apology. For my honesty. And that was what undid me. He didn't touch me. Not yet. He just sat there, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him, like the way a candle doesn't need to burn you to remind you it's alive. I stared at the floor, at the place where the wood slats met the soft edge of the rug. Funny, the things we notice when we're trying not to say what matters. Behind that silence was a memory, one I hadn't spoken aloud in months. The night I'd come home late from the hospital. Exhausted, drained. I'd held my mother's hand through her last breath, then drove home in the dark with no one to call. He had stayed up for me. Didn't ask questions. Just wrapped his arms around me and let me fall apart into his shirt. That night had stitched something permanent between us. But lately, that thread had started to fray. Not because of anything cruel. But because we'd both learned to suffer quietly, and that kind of silence becomes its own language. He spoke first this time. You hold everything in, he said gently. Even the parts that break you. I wanted to argue. To defend my strength. But all I could do was breathe through the ache. And you don't? I asked. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. Of course I do. But not with you. That landed like a slow echo in my chest. I looked up at him, finally. And for a second, everything in me wanted to collapse into him. To ask if he still saw me the same. To confess how often I feel like I'm failing, at love, at softness, at being the version of myself he first fell for. But the words stayed buried. I miss us, I said instead. I never left, he answered. But I need you to want to come back. He reached for my hand, not forcefully, not dramatically, just a quiet offering. I didn't take it. Not yet. Because in that moment, I realized something terrifying and true. Wanting someone isn't always enough. Sometimes, we have to fight for softness, even when we're too tired to speak. His hand hovered in the space between us, open, steady. But I couldn't move. Not yet. My fingers tightened around the edge of my robe like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. The silence was louder now, not empty, but filled with everything we hadn't said. Months of half-finished conversations. Missed kisses. The way we'd shared a bed but not a breath. I wanted to reach for him. God, I did. But the ache in my chest wasn't just about him. It was about me, who I'd become. Who I was afraid I no longer knew how to be. Do you ever wonder if we're just pretending we're okay? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. His brow furrowed, but his tone stayed calm. Sometimes. But pretending's easy. This, sitting in the silence, letting it hurt, that's not pretending. I blinked hard. The tears didn't fall. They just welled, quiet and stubborn, like the truth behind them wasn't ready to spill yet. I feel like I've been walking around with this weight, I said. Like I'm scared if I let go for even a second, everything will fall apart. Work. Us. Me. He exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding that same truth in his own lungs. I don't need you to be perfect, he said. I just need you to stop hiding from me. From us. His hand was still there. Still waiting. And in that moment, it wasn't just about touch. It was about surrender. But surrender requires trust. And trust, it's not something you fall into. It's something you choose, even when it terrifies you. So I looked at him, really looked. At the man who stayed. Who listened. Who waited in the dark without asking for anything but me. I wanted to fall forward, to collapse into his chest, to feel his arms around me and believe that love was still enough. But instead, I whispered, what if I don't know how to come back? He didn't flinch. You don't have to know how, he said, softer than I've ever heard him. Just, let me hold the door open. And then, I reached. But not for his hand. For his heart, the one I'd been avoiding. And he felt it. He knew it. But still, he didn't move. He was waiting for me to cross that final inch. Just as my fingers hovered in the space between his, that fragile moment stretched too thin, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. Once. Then again. He didn't look at it. But I did. A name. One I hadn't seen in over a year. Clara. The air shifted. Not cold. Not angry. Just aware. He noticed my pause, followed my gaze, and his jaw tightened just slightly. Barely. But enough. She reached out last week, he said quietly. I didn't reply. I should have told you. The space between our hands grew wider without either of us moving. Clara. The ex who almost wasn't an ex. The one he used to share coffee with during a rough patch in our second year. The one he swore was harmless, and maybe she was. But it was the timing that haunted me. The way her name only showed up when we were fragile. I didn't accuse him. I didn't even speak. But I felt my chest tighten, not from jealousy, but from fear. Because sometimes, it's not betrayal that breaks you. It's the reminder that someone else could have been easier to love. I didn't hide it because I have something to hide, he added, softer now. I just didn't want to make this even harder. His voice held no guilt. Just weariness. Like a man who knew how close the ground beneath him had become. I looked away, the tears finally breaking loose, not from anger, but from heartbreak I didn't want to admit was mine. Do you still talk to her in your head? I asked, surprising even myself. He didn't answer right away. And that silence, that pause, said more than any yes ever could. I think about who I was when I knew her, he finally said. But I don't want her. I want you. Even if you're breaking. Even if you're not sure. I nodded slowly. But something inside me had cracked just a little wider. Not because I didn't believe him. But because I realized I'd been holding back for the same reason. There were people I thought about, too. Memories I hadn't touched in years. And maybe, we were both standing in a room full of ghosts. Still reaching for each other, but wondering if the past would always whisper louder than the present. I sat there with his words between us like a fog, thick, honest, and too heavy to ignore. I don't want her. I want you. And yet the ache didn't ease. Because love, even when real, doesn't erase the quiet doubts that grow in silence. The truth was, we had both drifted. Not out of disloyalty, but out of exhaustion. Life had pulled at our edges until there was almost nothing left in the middle to hold on to. And yet, here we were. Still reaching. Still sitting in the soft quiet of our shared room. Still wanting, even after all the forgetting. He reached for the phone and turned it face down without a word. Not to hide it, but to close the door he should have closed long ago. Then he did something unexpected. He stood up and left the room. For a moment, I thought he was walking away. But when he returned, he was holding an old shoebox, the one we kept in the back of the closet, the one filled with Polaroids and notes and scribbled promises from younger, lighter versions of us. He placed it on the bed beside me and said, if we're going to fight for this, we need to remember who we were. Before the silence. Before the holding back. My breath caught. He opened the box, slowly, and on top, folded neatly, was a letter. My handwriting. A note I wrote him on our first anniversary. One I had forgotten. But he hadn't. He handed it to me, eyes gentle. I read this last night. That's why I stayed up. I unfolded the paper with trembling hands. It read, even when we're old and tired, I hope you still make me beg, not for forgiveness or affection, but for one more minute awake beside you. Because sleep is sweet, but not sweeter than you. I covered my mouth, the tears too full to hold back now. He leaned in, finally touching my hand, and whispered, that's what I was waiting for. And I knew. He hadn't been punishing me. He had been waiting for me to remember. Not who I thought I should be, but who I already was, with him. And finally, I let myself fall forward. Not into sleep, but into him. The letter rested between us like a bridge, fragile, but real. And in that moment, something shifted. Not loudly. Not all at once. But softly, like the first breeze after a storm. Like remembering the smell of something familiar you didn't realize you'd missed. He wrapped his arm around my shoulder, not to fix me, not to quiet the ache, but to say, I see you. Still. Even now. And I let my head fall against him, letting go of the weight I didn't know I'd carried this long. There were still questions. Still gaps to close and wounds that wouldn't heal overnight. But we weren't avoiding them anymore. We weren't pretending. We were present. That night, we didn't talk much. We lay there with the box of memories between us, our fingers brushing occasionally as we flipped through faded pictures of laughter, road trips, birthdays, burned dinners. And somewhere in that quiet, I remembered why I fell in love with him in the first place. It wasn't just the way he looked at me. It was the way he waited. With patience. With hope. With belief that even the tired parts of love are still worth holding. We didn't beg for forgiveness. Or passion. Or closure. We just stayed. Together. And sometimes, that's all love needs to begin again. Sometimes the most intimate thing you can do is stay, even when everything in you wants to sleep.